It started with a flash. No, hundreds of them. Cameras exploded like fireworks outside the Beverly Hills Hotel, a familiar chorus of light and noise that usually meant one thing: another Hollywood power night. Except this time, the cameras weren't aimed at a red carpet arrival. They were pointed at something no one had ever seen before: a duchess, frozen mid-stride, stopped cold at the entrance by a guard who wouldn't budge. Meghan Markle, once a symbol of elegance and global influence, stood there stunned as the security detail whispered into their earpieces, shook their heads, and blocked her path. In that instant, the woman who had conquered Buckingham Palace, Netflix, and the world's headlines found herself on the wrong side of the velvet rope. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. People gasped. Paparazzi zoomed in. You could almost hear the collective question ripple through the air. What just happened? Did the security not recognize her? Or did someone deliberately deny her entry? Was this just a mistake, or was it something far more calculated? That confusion would ignite a media storm that would rage for days, leaving Meghan furious, humiliated, and determined to find out who was behind it. But to understand how it came to this moment, why a woman once called the most influential in the world was suddenly told, "You're not on the list," we have to rewind the tape and look closer at what was really happening behind the scenes. This wasn't just another Hollywood event. The Variety Power of Women Gala has always been more than a night of recognition. It's a symbol of belonging. It's where the industry crowns its chosen few, the women who shape culture, command influence, and represent everything the industry wants to be seen supporting. For Meghan, this wasn't just an invitation. It was validation. After the relentless criticism of her Netflix series, the failed Spotify deal, and growing rumors of Hollywood distancing itself from the Sussex brand, this was supposed to be her redemption moment. Her big return. The chance to remind everyone that she was still relevant, still powerful, still adored. But in that single moment at the door, everything collapsed. The footage spread within minutes. A fan posted it on TikTok with the caption, "Did Variety just block Meghan Markle?" Within hours, it hit 1 million views. Comment sections exploded. Some mocked her. Guess Hollywood's over the royal drama. Others defended her. She's still Meghan. They can't treat her like that. But no one knew what really happened. All anyone could see was a furious Meghan Markle trying to keep her composure while security stood firm. And yet, if you looked closely, you could see the shift in her face, the slow, dawning realization that this wasn't an accident, that someone, somewhere, had made a decision. And that decision had consequences. For years, Meghan had positioned herself as the bridge between royalty and celebrity, a humanitarian who could command attention in both Buckingham Palace and Beverly Hills. But the bridge was crumbling. Her public image had taken hit after hit: the royal rift, the media feuds, the diva rumors on set. Each scandal left a small crack. Tonight, it finally shattered. The irony? Just days before, her team had leaked whispers that she'd be honored at the event, rumors suggesting Variety was planning to present her as a symbol of modern female empowerment. The idea thrilled her fans and irritated her critics. But when the official list came out, her name was nowhere to be found. A clerical error, her spokesperson claimed. She's still attending as a guest. But in Hollywood, perception is everything. And to be removed from a guest list like that was already an unspoken message. Something had shifted. Still, Meghan refused to accept it. She arrived anyway. Imagine the scene. A black SUV gliding through the circular driveway. Tinted windows, bodyguards stepping out first. Then Meghan, radiant in a white gown, every camera drawn to her. Her stride confident, her expression composed. She knew the choreography: smile, wave, pose, ascend the stairs. But halfway there, something went wrong. The guard at the door checked his list, looked up, and shook his head. Her name wasn't there. Not under Meghan Markle, not under Duchess of Sussex. Her assistant stepped forward, whispering frantically, but the guard stayed firm. One onlooker later described it like watching a royal train derail in slow motion. And in that moment, Meghan's mask slipped. The charm, the composure, it cracked, just slightly. Enough for the cameras to catch the flash of disbelief in her eyes. Enough for the tabloids to feast on for weeks. But this story isn't about one embarrassing moment. It's about what that moment represents: the unraveling of an image, the consequences of ambition colliding with power, and the brutal politics of fame. Because the truth is, this denial wasn't random. Behind those glass doors, decisions had been made, calls placed, names crossed out. And if the whispers are to be believed, Meghan's exclusion was no accident. It was deliberate. Why? That's the question the world began asking. Some said Variety's organizers didn't want controversy overshadowing the event. Others claimed powerful Hollywood executives, once her allies, had grown weary of her reputation. And then there were the rumors, darker and more personal, suggesting that someone high up wanted to make a point. Meghan Markle's reign over Hollywood was over. That's the story she didn't want told. To her supporters, Meghan has always represented something bigger, a woman who fought an ancient institution and lived to tell the tale. But in Hollywood, power is fleeting, loyalty is conditional, and second chances are expensive. Meghan thought she could rebuild her image on her own terms. What she didn't realize was that every door she tried to open had someone guarding it, someone who remembered every slight, every feud, every whisper. And tonight, those doors stayed shut. Inside, the event carried on as if nothing happened. Cameras flashed, celebrities mingled, speeches were made about female solidarity and empowerment. But outside, a different story unfolded. Meghan's team huddled near the valet entrance, her assistant clutching a phone, pacing, whispering. Meghan herself stood apart, arms crossed, watching the red carpet from a distance. The glow of her phone screen reflected in her eyes as she read the headlines already being written. Every minute she stayed, the humiliation deepened. Every second, more cameras arrived. Her security advised retreat, but her pride held her in place. "They can't do this," she reportedly muttered, the disbelief curling into anger. They can't. But they already had. You could almost feel the symbolism. The woman who once defied palace gates now facing another kind of gatekeeper. Not a royal guard this time, but a Hollywood one. And once again, she was on the outside looking in. Maybe you've felt that before, thinking you've moved past rejection, only to find it waiting at another door. Maybe that's why the clip resonated with millions. It wasn't just Meghan's humiliation they were watching. It was the collapse of control, the reminder that no matter how high you rise, someone always holds the key. But here's the part no one saw on camera. After the confrontation, Meghan's SUV didn't drive her straight home. It took her somewhere else, somewhere she thought she could regroup, plan her next move, and call in favors. She wasn't done fighting. She never is. Because if there's one thing Meghan Markle has mastered, it's the art of the comeback. And she was determined to make this one the biggest yet. Still, behind the determination was something darker, a growing fear that she was running out of allies. Calls went unanswered, messages left on read. Even people who once called her inspiring now kept their distance. She had gone from palace exile to Hollywood pariah in less than a year. What caused it? Was it arrogance, misunderstanding, or a deliberate campaign to erase her influence? The truth, as always, lies somewhere in between. And while Meghan tried to frame the moment as a misunderstanding, insiders whispered a different story, that Variety's organizers had received quiet pressure from powerful figures warning against her attendance. Not because of security, but because of optics. They didn't want the event's message of empowerment overshadowed by controversy. That word, controversy, has followed Meghan like a shadow. In the palace, in the press, and now in Hollywood. And yet, it's that same fire that made her famous. The same boldness that captured Prince Harry's heart. The same defiance that once made her unstoppable. So what changed? Maybe it's that Hollywood, unlike royalty, doesn't forgive easily. In an industry built on image, reputation is currency, and Meghan's was losing value fast. Netflix had gone quiet. Spotify had pulled the plug. Her new projects were in development, but no one seemed sure what that meant anymore. Even her A-list friendships were thinning. Her name was still powerful, but not in the way she hoped. And now, denied entry to an event celebrating the power of women, Meghan found herself confronting an irony too sharp to ignore. The woman who once stood as a global advocate for female empowerment was being told, in front of everyone, that her power no longer opened doors. What happens to a person when their image crumbles in real time? When they're forced to watch, powerless, as the world they built turns its back? That's the story tonight. The fall, the fury, and the fallout of a moment that exposed far more than just an oversight at a red carpet entrance. Because what came next was chaos. Within 24 hours, leaks began pouring out, emails, texts, and insider accounts painting a picture of what really went on behind the scenes. Alleged phone calls between Meghan's team and Variety's PR department. Conflicting explanations. Hollywood power players quietly distancing themselves from the Duchess. And a deeper question taking shape. Was this the night Meghan Markle lost her final grip on the Hollywood throne she fought so hard to claim? She thought she could control the story. But this story had a life of its own. And it's only just beginning. Because if you think being denied entry was the worst part, wait until you see what happened next. The calls, the betrayals, the secret recordings, and the one name Meghan never expected to find at the center of it all. That's where the truth lies. That's where everything changes. And no one, especially Meghan, saw it coming. Have you ever seen a royal stopped in her tracks, not by paparazzi, not by fans, but by a simple security guard? Because that's exactly what happened that night. Meghan Markle, poised and radiant in her white gown, stepped out of the sleek black SUV and expected the usual chorus of flashes, the polite ushering of VIPs, the applause and whispers of admiration. She was ready for her moment of recognition, her Hollywood comeback, the red carpet glow she thought she deserved. Instead, she found herself frozen, caught mid-step, as a security officer checked a list and, with the faintest shake of his head, denied her entry. The first few seconds were surreal. Meghan's eyes widened slightly, almost imperceptibly, but the cameras caught it. Her assistant, already holding a phone ready to clarify, leaned in to whisper instructions. But the guard's expression was immovable, a barrier that refused to budge. It was not a polite delay, not a misunderstanding. This was a stop sign she could not ignore. Flashbulbs popped faster, capturing every heartbeat, every micro-expression, every second of disbelief. Witnesses later described the scene as if time slowed down, a princess of the people reduced to questioning reality. But let's pause and consider the tension. Meghan had navigated far more public scrutiny than most could imagine. She had faced the relentless scrutiny of the royal press, endured whispered critiques of her fashion, her demeanor, her relationships, and yet she always emerged composed. Tonight, however, was different. This was Hollywood, not the palace. The rules were different, the gatekeepers unyielding, and the stakes unmistakably clear. Entry here was not just about walking into a building. It was about public perception, about power, about belonging. As Meghan stood there, the murmurs around her grew louder. Onlookers whispered, "Isn't that Meghan Markle?" A few fans gasped, some laughed nervously. The atmosphere was electric, a mixture of confusion and anticipation. Would she storm off? Would she confront the guard? Or would she quietly retreat, preserving her dignity? Meghan's mind raced. Every second on that spot magnified the humiliation she could feel creeping in, and yet, a spark of defiance began to flicker. She would not simply vanish into the night. And here's where the story deepens. The denial was not random. The guard had orders. Whether these orders came from the event organizers, from a corporate executive, or from a behind-the-scenes decision-maker, the effect was the same. Meghan Markle, the woman who had once commanded global attention, now faced the reality of exclusion. She was denied what so many took for granted. A list had been checked, a box had been marked, and suddenly, she was not invited. Her team acted quickly. Phones were pulled out. Voices whispered urgently. Calls were made to clarify, to explain, to negotiate. Meghan, poised in her gown, began pacing subtly, calculating her options while maintaining an exterior of calm. But inside, the mix of disbelief, frustration, and rising anger built with every passing second. Each flash of the camera felt like a spotlight on failure, a magnifying glass on vulnerability. This was a moment no PR team wanted caught on tape, and yet, it was every journalist's dream. Let's zoom in on the psychological stakes. For Meghan, entry wasn't just about attending a gala. It was about being seen, about reaffirming relevance. After months of speculation over her professional endeavors, including the cancellation of her Netflix series and the quiet shelving of other projects, this event was meant to be a statement. Meghan Markle was still a force to be reckoned with, and Hollywood had no choice but to acknowledge it. But denial at the threshold communicated the opposite. Suddenly, the story was no longer about her presence or influence. It was about rejection, about exclusion, about a public setback that could not be ignored. Meanwhile, the crowd's reaction amplified the drama. Fans and paparazzi captured every detail on their phones, some streaming live, others snapping photos for immediate online upload. Within minutes, the clips began circulating on social media, sparking debate. Was this a mere error or a deliberate slight? Could someone really have orchestrated this? Online comments flooded in, some mocking, some sympathetic, all curious. The viral momentum of these first moments would set the tone for days of headlines and speculation. And as the seconds stretched into minutes, Meghan's posture shifted subtly. The initial shock was giving way to calculation, to strategy. She recognized that her response here could define the narrative. A fiery confrontation could reinforce the diva image her critics loved to invoke. A silent exit could be spun as defeat. She needed a middle path, poised defiance. But even the most calculated strategies could not fully contain the emotional surge of being publicly denied. At this point, her assistant stepped forward again, whispering urgently. Phones rang, texts flew, instructions came and went. The guard remained firm, however, each word and gesture a silent reminder that entry was forbidden. It was an inflection point, the tension between ambition and reality, between expectation and exclusion, between image and control. Every observer, inside the event, outside on the red carpet, and online, was watching. The narrative was forming in real time, and Meghan's reaction would be dissected, analyzed, and broadcast to millions. But it wasn't just about public perception. The denial carried a deeper message. For Meghan, who had navigated palace hierarchies and media storms with remarkable skill, being stopped at the door by a Hollywood security guard was a stark reminder that influence and prestige are situational. The palace may have once shielded her from certain slights, but Hollywood had no such obligations. The rules of access were clear: no invitation, no entry. And now, she was learning that lesson in the harshest possible way. As the cameras continued flashing, Meghan's expression hardened. She didn't smile. She didn't laugh. Her jaw tightened. Her eyes narrowed. The fury was rising, slow but undeniable. Those who watched closely could see it building, a combination of shock, disbelief, and a growing resolve. She wasn't going to disappear quietly. Not tonight. Not when the world was watching. Meanwhile, speculation began circulating rapidly. Was this a mistake? Could the organizers have accidentally crossed her name off the list? Or was it something more sinister? Someone in Hollywood's upper echelons had influence over attendance. Someone had decided whether Meghan Markle, Duchess of Sussex, would be allowed in. The implications were massive. Denial of entry at a prestigious event could signal a turning point in public perception, a subtle but powerful shift in the narrative surrounding her career and personal brand. And yet, Meghan's determination remained. She wasn't just standing there in disbelief. She was plotting her next move. Calls were made, contacts reached, and whispers exchanged. She was assembling a plan right there on the sidewalk, under the glaring lights. Every detail, every word, every gesture mattered. Her response could reshape the story from humiliation into a statement of defiance. But what made this moment even more remarkable and terrifying was its symbolism. The woman who had navigated royal protocol, media scrutiny, and global attention now faced exclusion in a completely different arena: Hollywood. And unlike the palace, Hollywood's judgment was public, immediate, and irreversible. One misstep could be magnified. One emotional reaction could become the headline. One miscalculated decision could define the narrative for months. And what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What would you do if you discovered your name had been quietly erased from a guest list, replaced, rewritten, removed without explanation? For Meghan Markle, that revelation hit like a thunderbolt. Behind the glitz of the red carpet and the flashing cameras, someone had made a decision that would define her night, and perhaps her career trajectory in Hollywood. The guest list for the Variety Power of Women 2025 Gala, usually a confidential document guarded with precision, had been leaked. And when Meghan's team saw it, the shock was instantaneous. Her name was missing, completely absent. Not a typo, not a misprint, not even a placeholder. Just gone. Her assistant gasped first. The production team scrambled, checking alternate lists, double-checking the digital entries. Nothing. Meghan, standing off to the side, absorbed the news with a chilling mixture of disbelief and rising anger. Her name, which should have been in lights, had been replaced by another. Someone else had taken the spot she had been promised. In Hollywood, symbolic gestures matter. Invitations are statements. Removal is a message. And now, she was the message. The immediate question became obvious. Who had the power to do this? Guest lists are carefully curated. Each name is weighed against the optics, the politics, and the PR narrative of the evening. For a figure like Meghan Markle, exclusion isn't just a personal slight. It's a public one, amplified by cameras and social media, destined to dominate headlines. There was only one conclusion. This was intentional. Social media exploded almost immediately after the leak. Screenshots circulated with the caption, "Meghan Markle doesn't make the cut," and hashtags began trending. Hashtag Meghan denied. Hashtag power of women. Hashtag Hollywood snub. Analysts and gossip commentators weighed in, dissecting the political implications of such a high-profile exclusion. Some suggested it was a classic Hollywood power move, subtle, indirect, but highly effective. Others speculated on personal grudges, the hidden maneuverings of former allies, or the long shadows of her royal past intruding into her Hollywood future. The theories were endless, but the effect was unanimous. Meghan's exclusion had become the story of the night. For Meghan herself, the leak was more than embarrassing. It was a warning. Hollywood is ruthless, and its insiders operate with precise signals. A denied invitation is a public demonstration of influence. The powerful decide who belongs, and the rest are left scrambling. To a woman accustomed to commanding attention, this was a stark reminder that in this arena, past prestige offers no guarantees. Reputation is fluid, influence is conditional, and being sidelined is instantaneous. But it wasn't just about the omission, it was about what replaced her. Another name appeared in her place, a subtle but telling choice. It wasn't a direct insult, but it was a declaration of priority, a statement of taste and alignment. The message was clear. The organizers, or the forces behind them, had made a choice, and it wasn't her. For someone whose life has been meticulously curated, where every public appearance carries weight, this was a seismic shift. The realization hit Meghan like ice. Someone had rewritten the narrative, literally crossing her name off the list, and in doing so, they had crossed her out of the story she intended to tell that night. Her mind raced as she absorbed the implications. Could it have been an error? Someone miscommunicated? Perhaps. But as Meghan had learned through years of royal life and public scrutiny, errors are rarely innocent. And in the world of Hollywood, mistakes are magnified, spun, and weaponized. She knew that if she reacted impulsively, the narrative would be hers to lose. But if she stayed silent, she would allow the story to define her in a way she could never control. Then came the internal questions. Who leaked the guest list? Who had the audacity or the leverage to manipulate such a high-profile event? And why? Theories circulated immediately. Some pointed fingers at rival celebrities who might have felt threatened by her presence. Others whispered of insiders within Variety itself, PR professionals with connections, individuals with grudges, or simply people who didn't want a royal shadow looming over Hollywood's carefully curated celebration. Whatever the reason, the leak had set the stage for an unprecedented confrontation. The psychological impact cannot be overstated. Meghan, accustomed to power and influence, found herself confronting the harsh reality of Hollywood hierarchy. It was one thing to face criticism, rumors, or paparazzi intrusion. It was another entirely to be erased from the very event designed to celebrate women's power. Symbolically, this was devastating. The irony was bitter. A woman known for advocating empowerment and equality being denied access to a night devoted to the very ideals she claimed to represent. Social media provided a real-time measure of the fallout. Clips of Meghan outside the venue circulated, overlaid with commentary questioning her relevance and influence. Some accused her of entitlement. Others sympathized, framing the incident as a cruel snub. But in either case, the public spectacle was now unavoidable. Meghan's brand, carefully constructed over years of public appearances, royal engagements, and Hollywood ventures, had been thrust into a precarious position. Her reaction would be scrutinized, her next move anticipated, and every word analyzed. In the face of this, Meghan demonstrated a blend of strategic thinking and emotional intensity. Her team immediately began damage control, emails sent, calls made, alternative arrangements proposed. They attempted to negotiate her entry, but the list was final. Instructions from the top had already been issued. She was not to enter. Every attempt to reverse the decision was met with polite, but firm, refusals. The stark reality was settling in. This was not a negotiation. This was a deliberate exclusion. The tension escalated when internal sources suggested the reasoning behind her omission. Some insiders claimed it was an attempt to avoid controversy, a quiet maneuver to prevent a royal presence from overshadowing the event. Others suggested strategic positioning, ensuring that other celebrities received the spotlight without competition. And a few whispered darker motives: resentment, rivalry, or a belief that Meghan's presence would draw unwanted media attention and scrutiny. Each explanation carried weight, each added a layer of intrigue, and each compounded the emotional stakes for Meghan. Her next step was pivotal. Meghan could have retreated gracefully, leaving the cameras behind and quietly accepting the slight. She could have attempted a public relations maneuver, framing the incident as a misunderstanding. But Meghan's instincts, honed through years of navigating royal scrutiny and Hollywood politics, told her that the story would not end quietly. This denial, whether accidental or intentional, could not be left unchallenged. She would need to act, to assert control, and to reclaim the narrative on her terms. Meanwhile, the optics outside the venue were unmistakable. Fans, journalists, and social media audiences watched in real time as Meghan deliberated her next move. Every subtle gesture, the tightening of her jaw, the tilt of her head, the glint in her eyes, was interpreted, dissected, and discussed. In a world where perception is power, she had just been publicly put in a position of weakness, and the consequences were immediate. And yet, amid the public spectacle and private panic, Meghan's strategic mind was already calculating. Who would benefit from her absence? Who stood to gain by excluding her? Which alliances could be leveraged to reverse the situation, or at least mitigate the public fallout? Every thought, every calculation, was intensified by the knowledge that the cameras would not look away, that the world was watching, and that social media would ensure the incident's permanence in public consciousness. As the chapter closes, consider this. The omission of a single name on a list may seem trivial. But for Meghan Markle, it was not trivial. It was symbolic, public, and potent. It was a message encoded in ink, a subtle yet undeniable declaration that she was no longer welcome in the room she had prepared to command. And as she considered her next move, one thing was clear: this was no longer about attendance. This was about power, influence, and reclaiming a narrative that had just been rewritten without her consent. But what came next would push Meghan further than she had ever gone before, and no one, not even her most loyal allies, saw it coming. Have you ever wondered who really decides who gets in and who stays out? Because that night, outside the Variety Power of Women 2025 gala, Meghan Markle learned firsthand that power isn't always about fame, influence, or past accomplishments. It's about the invisible hands that control access, the gatekeepers who determine not just whether you enter, but how the world will see you when you do or don't. As Meghan stood outside, the cameras flashing around her, a closer look reveals a network of authority layered far beyond the security guard at the velvet rope. That guard wasn't acting independently. He was the physical manifestation of a chain of power stretching all the way back to Variety's executive offices, perhaps even beyond. Orders had been given, names had been scrutinized, and a decision had been finalized. Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex, was not allowed entry. Inside those glass doors, the air smelled of expensive perfume, champagne, and anticipation. Executives, producers, celebrities, and journalists moved through the halls with the confidence of people who knew the rules and expected compliance. And outside, Meghan realized she was confronting an entirely different set of rules. Ones that weren't subject to royal protocol, personal charm, or public acclaim. Hollywood had its own hierarchy, its own secret economy of influence, and tonight, she had found herself on the wrong side of it. The first revelation came quietly. Insiders later reported that the decision to deny Meghan entry wasn't spontaneous. It had been discussed days prior, in meetings where guest lists were reviewed line by line. Security protocols were enforced not simply to maintain safety, but to protect optics, to manage perception, to control narrative. Someone at a higher level had weighed the potential risks of Meghan's attendance and concluded that it was preferable to keep her out. But why? That was the question hanging in the night air, unanswered yet all-consuming. One theory pointed to an internal power struggle. Variety, like much of Hollywood, operates on subtle hierarchies. Editors, event organizers, PR strategists, all wield influence over who is seen and who is invisible. The decision to exclude Meghan may have been less about personal animosity and more about preserving control. The event's message of empowerment was fragile. The organizers could not afford to have controversy overshadow the carefully curated image of their honorees. And Meghan Markle, with her combination of royal past, celebrity media presence, and polarizing reputation, represented a variable too volatile to manage. But it wasn't just strategy, it was also politics. Hollywood insiders whispered about behind-the-scenes maneuvering, about executives leveraging connections, and about powerful individuals who may have quietly requested that Meghan's presence be curtailed. These whispers suggested a network of influence operating in secrecy, a shadow force controlling access and enforcing consequences with surgical precision. And Meghan, who had navigated palace politics for years, now faced a world where the rules were unwritten and the penalties immediate. The security guard was merely the first line of enforcement. Behind him, an unseen decision-maker had determined that Meghan's attendance was undesirable, risky, or inconvenient. The symbolic weight of that moment, being physically denied entry, was amplified by the knowledge that the decision was deliberate. And the realization was crushing. Access to power, even for someone who had once commanded global attention, is never guaranteed. In Hollywood, as in royalty, someone else always holds the key. Meghan's reaction was a complex blend of disbelief, frustration, and rising anger. She had expected resistance, perhaps, but not this level of exclusion. The event organizers, she knew, had influence that extended far beyond the gala itself. Their approval could impact future collaborations, media coverage, and public perception. By being denied entry, Meghan was not merely blocked from a building. She was subtly told that her influence, her ambition, and her narrative were now negotiable, contingent on someone else's discretion. Meanwhile, the crowd outside reacted in real time. Flashbulbs exploded like fireworks, capturing every nuance of Meghan's posture, expression, and movements. Observers noted the shift in her demeanor, from calm determination to measured fury, as she processed the enormity of the situation. Social media amplified the moment, turning a single denial into a viral narrative of rejection, speculation, and intrigue. And yet, the most critical element remained hidden from public view: the hierarchy of power behind the door and the motivations that had led to Meghan's exclusion. Analysts later described the dynamics as a Hollywood gatekeeping mechanism, where control over access equates to control over narrative. Every guest's presence is vetted not just for reputation, but for perceived alignment with the event's image, potential media fallout, and strategic partnerships. Meghan's royal past, once a source of fascination and influence, had become a liability in this context. Her brand, once untouchable in certain circles, was now subject to scrutiny, leverage, and, ultimately, denial. In that moment, Meghan faced the stark reality that influence is contextual. It is not static. Power, she realized, is fluid, and entry is never guaranteed, even for someone of her stature. And while palace protocol had once shielded her from certain slights, Hollywood offered no such protections. The velvet rope was both literal and symbolic, a barrier that communicated status, approval, and hierarchy. And Meghan's position on the wrong side of that rope signaled a profound shift in the narrative surrounding her career. The emotional impact of this revelation cannot be overstated. For Meghan, who had meticulously curated every public appearance, every engagement, and every statement, being blocked by unseen forces represented not just a public slight, but a personal challenge to her authority, reputation, and sense of agency. She had navigated royal scrutiny and media judgment with remarkable composure, but Hollywood's invisible power structures presented a different, less predictable challenge. As Meghan's team scrambled to negotiate entry, it became increasingly clear that the decision was final. Calls were made, texts sent, and emails fired off to higher-ups within the Variety organization. But every attempt was met with polite refusals, reaffirming the guard's position and the legitimacy of the exclusion. For Meghan, the confirmation was brutal. Someone, somewhere, had intentionally decided that she should not be part of this evening. And it wasn't just about attendance. Denial carried layers of implication, public perception, influence, and control. To those watching, it appeared as a spectacle, a moment of humiliation. To Meghan, it was a lesson in the mechanics of power, a stark reminder that prestige and visibility are always mediated by gatekeepers. Even those who have walked in royal corridors, navigated palace intrigue, and commanded international attention can be denied entry, rendered invisible, and reminded of the fragility of influence. Meanwhile, the symbolic weight of the denial intensified. Being stopped at the threshold was more than a procedural inconvenience. It was a public statement, a subtle recalibration of status. The guard, a representative of the chain of authority, became the embodiment of power, executing a decision made at levels beyond Meghan's immediate perception. And while she absorbed the immediate frustration and shock, her mind turned toward strategy, recalibration, and reclamation. She could not allow this narrative to define her, not now, not ever. The chapter closes with a chilling realization. The security guard, the list, the decision, it was all part of a larger orchestration. Hollywood's power structures had spoken, and Meghan had been reminded that even global figures are subject to influence and exclusion. But the story didn't end at the door. Behind every denial, every whispered decision, every calculated exclusion, there were consequences that would ripple outward, shaping reputations, alliances, and future opportunities. And Meghan, fiercely ambitious and unyielding, was already plotting her next move. But what came next would pull Meghan even deeper into a labyrinth of alliances, betrayals, and revelations that no one, not even her closest confidants, could have anticipated. What happens when Hollywood, the industry that once celebrated you, suddenly turns its back? Because for Meghan Markle, the night at the Variety Power of Women 2025 Gala wasn't just about being denied entry. It was a reflection of a much larger shift. A shift in influence, reputation, and power. Hollywood had always been a land of opportunity, but it had rules, hierarchies, and gatekeepers that even a former duchess could not ignore. That night, Meghan faced the stark realization that she was no longer untouchable, that the industry she had hoped to conquer was closing ranks against her. It's easy to underestimate the subtle power dynamics of Hollywood. On the surface, it's glittering red carpets, flashing cameras, and champagne toasts. But beneath that shine lies a complex network of relationships, loyalties, and unspoken agreements. Invitations are currency, appearances are statements, and association is influence. Meghan, who had navigated royal corridors and commanded global attention, suddenly found herself facing the cold mechanics of an industry that does not forgive easily. To be denied at such a critical event was not merely embarrassing, it was a signal. Weeks prior, Meghan had been courted by Hollywood insiders. The emotional stakes were profound. Meghan, who had cultivated a global persona of confidence, intelligence, and resilience, now faced a collective shrug from an industry that once celebrated her. The contrast was stark. Palace protocols had once shielded her, managed perception, and even amplified her successes. Hollywood offered no such protections. Here, Perception is raw, instantaneous, and unforgiving. Every move, every expression, every reaction is cataloged, amplified, and judged. Meghan's denial was more than a minor setback. It was an awakening to the harsh realities of an industry that measures success not by intent, but by public consensus. Insiders later revealed that some of Hollywood's response was preemptive. Key figures had been briefed to avoid being photographed with her, to sidestep potential media fallout, and to mitigate the risk of headlines overshadowing their own agendas. What had seemed like an isolated exclusion at the door was, in fact, part of a broader effort to regulate influence, to maintain a hierarchy, and to ensure that the narrative remained under tight control. Every decision, every slight, every whispered word served to reinforce the boundaries of power. This shift was also deeply personal. For Meghan, the contrast between the palace and Hollywood was jarring. In royal circles, protocol, tradition, and ceremony dictated access. Her title had commanded attention and respect, and even detractors acknowledged her prominence. In Hollywood, however, the rules were less codified, more mercurial, and governed by perception, alliances, and subtle social cues. The denial at the Variety Gala became a symbol of this contrast. The world she had once navigated with precision now operated according to a system she was only beginning to understand. And yet, the denial did not quell her ambition. If anything, it intensified it. Meghan's strategic mind, trained in palace diplomacy and media engagement, immediately began calculating responses. She assessed allies, identified potential intermediaries, and considered the optics of every possible move. But the longer she lingered in public view outside the gala, the more visible her frustration became, and the more the media narrative solidified around her humiliation. Social media clips went viral within minutes, framing her as reactive, defiant, and, to some, desperate. In parallel, her publicist team worked furiously behind the scenes. Emergency calls were made to Variety executives. Emails were fired off to contacts in the media. Suggested spin strategies ranged from framing the incident as a simple error to emphasizing Meghan's commitment to women's empowerment, even outside the formal event. But every action was complicated by the fact that Hollywood insiders were already interpreting her every move as evidence of overreach or entitlement. The irony was thick. Meghan, who had spent years advocating for women's voices, now found herself excluded from a celebration of exactly that. Her story was meant to inspire, to signify achievement, to showcase influence. Instead, it became a cautionary tale. Even the most prominent figures can be denied, isolated, and rendered powerless in the court of public perception. Hollywood had turned its back, and the implications for her brand, her projects, and her credibility were immediate. And as the night wore on, Meghan faced yet another layer of complexity. Whispers began circulating about who might have influenced the decision. Names of Hollywood executives, PR strategists, and other influential figures were speculated upon. Was it professional jealousy? Was it strategic caution? Was it personal animosity? Each theory carried weight, and each added fuel to the emotional fire burning within her. Finally, the symbolic weight of the event crystallized. Being turned away was more than denial. It was a statement about power, influence, and belonging. Meghan Markle, accustomed to commanding rooms, leading discussions, and shaping narratives, now faced the reality that in Hollywood, visibility is granted, influence is conditional, and access is controlled by invisible hierarchies. Her denial was a moment of clarity, a harsh lesson in the limitations of fame, and a reminder that no one, not even a duchess, is untouchable. And as the night closed, Meghan made a decision that would set the stage for the next dramatic chapter. She would not retreat quietly. The snub had ignited a fire, and she was already plotting how to reclaim narrative control, confront exclusion, and reassert her presence in an industry that had turned its back on her. But what she planned next would escalate tensions in ways no one anticipated, and the fallout would ripple through Hollywood, the media, and even her own inner circle. What happens when the person you trust most turns against you? For Meghan Markle, the night at the Variety Power of Women 2025 gala was already spiraling into chaos. But it took an even darker turn when she discovered that a key ally, the one person she believed would have her back, had quietly abandoned her. This wasn't just a snub by a faceless organization or a security guard carrying out orders. No, this was personal. And in Hollywood, personal often hurts the most. This ally had been a staunch supporter of Meghan's post-royal career, someone who had vouched for her in boardrooms, recommended her for projects, and lent credibility to her brand in the industry. Behind closed doors, this person had painted Meghan as ambitious, professional, and marketable, a figure whose royal past was an asset, not a liability. But the leaked guest list, the denied entry, and the carefully orchestrated avoidance were evidence that the ally had quietly changed sides, leaving Meghan exposed and humiliated in front of the world. The moment of realization hit during a private conversation. Meghan had reached out, hoping to leverage her ally's influence to clarify the guest list confusion. She expected a supportive voice on the other end of the line, someone who would advocate for her, ensure her name was reinstated, and help her navigate the PR nightmare. Instead, she was met with excuses, vague apologies, and a lukewarm acknowledgement that the event organizers have made their decision. The words, though polite, carried an unmistakable weight. You are on your own. It was a betrayal, but not an overt one. There were no confrontations, no shouting matches, only the subtle withdrawal of support, the silent repositioning of loyalty. And in Hollywood, subtlety is lethal. The absence of advocacy is as powerful as an open attack because it leaves you exposed, isolated, and vulnerable to the machinery of perception. Meghan, ever aware of optics, understood immediately that this was a calculated maneuver. The emotional impact was profound. Meghan had trusted this individual, confided in them, shared strategic plans, and relied on their influence to navigate complex social and professional networks. And yet, in the very moment she needed support, they had chosen convenience, self-preservation, or perhaps personal gain over loyalty. The sting of betrayal was sharp, compounded by the public nature of the event, where cameras and social media amplified every perceived slight. But this betrayal also revealed something deeper about Hollywood's ecosystem. Alliances are transactional. Trust is provisional. And even those who appear loyal can pivot when power, influence, or optics demand it. Meghan, with her history of navigating palace politics, understood that such maneuvers existed, but experiencing it firsthand in Hollywood was a different kind of shock. Here, there were no traditions to enforce respect, no ceremonial protocols to mandate courtesy, just perception, strategy, and the subtle enforcement of power. Meanwhile, the allies' silence, or half-hearted engagement, was noticed by others in the industry. Gossip began to circulate, speculation took hold, and social media amplified the narrative. Observers questioned whether Meghan had truly been denied entry due to a mistake or whether it was the culmination of insider maneuvering, with her ally quietly complicit. The optics were devastating. A Duchess of Sussex, once synonymous with poise and control, was now portrayed as isolated, unsupported, and vulnerable. Meghan's response, however, was calculated. She didn't immediately lash out. She didn't storm into public confrontation. Instead, she processed the betrayal strategically, analyzing motivations, weighing potential leverage, and considering the implications for her broader career trajectory. She recognized that inaction could be spun as weakness, but a misstep could provide ammunition for critics. The challenge was to navigate the emotional turmoil without losing narrative control. The betrayal also forced Meghan to reassess her broader network. She began evaluating every connection, every past alliance, every friendly gesture for authenticity. Who could she rely on? Who might pivot under pressure? Hollywood, she realized, was not just about talent, visibility, or royal mystique. It was about loyalty, timing, and influence. And in this ecosystem, her supposed allies could quickly become her adversaries. This internal recalibration was not without emotional cost. Meghan had to confront the reality that the very person who had once vouched for her had allowed the denial to happen. It wasn't just an omission, it was a strategic withdrawal that communicated to organizers, to media, and to the public that Meghan's standing in Hollywood was no longer secure. Trust, she realized, was fragile, and betrayal could arrive in the most unexpected forms. As Meghan grappled with the emotional and strategic implications, she also began noticing subtle shifts in the broader industry response. Individuals who had once been enthusiastic about her projects now hesitated. Invitations to events, interviews, and collaborative ventures became scarce. There was a quiet recalibration, a realignment of influence, and the Allies' betrayal was at the center of it. Hollywood was signaling its preference. Meghan Markle, despite her fame and accomplishments, was no longer untouchable. The psychological tension intensified as Meghan considered the potential consequences of exposure. If the betrayal became public knowledge, it could deepen the narrative of isolation, magnifying scrutiny and criticism. Yet silence allowed the betrayal to continue shaping perceptions unchallenged. She was trapped in a dilemma: act and risk escalation, or wait and risk further marginalization. Every option carried stakes, every decision required precision, and the emotional toll was immense. And then came the final revelation. The Allies' betrayal was not an isolated incident. Sources later revealed that there had been quiet lobbying behind the scenes, efforts to influence decision-makers at Variety, and subtle positioning to ensure Meghan's exclusion was both effective and irreversible. The denial at the door, initially perceived as a simple procedural matter, was in fact part of a larger strategy, with the ally at its center. The realization hit Meghan like a lightning strike. Her isolation had been orchestrated, and the betrayal was far more deliberate than she had imagined. This moment marked a turning point. Meghan understood that the path forward would require recalibration, strategy, and careful navigation. She could no longer rely on assumed allies, trusted intermediaries, or past relationships. Every step would require foresight, every interaction would carry weight, and every decision would shape not just public perception, but the trajectory of her Hollywood reentry. Yet, despite the emotional sting and the strategic setback, Meghan's resolve hardened. She was not accustomed to defeat. The betrayal, while painful, became fuel, a reminder that power must be claimed actively, defended aggressively, and leveraged intelligently. She began plotting next moves: who could still be aligned with her, which narratives could be reclaimed, and what public response would turn humiliation into a statement of defiance. The night's events, combined with the Allies' betrayal, crystallized a stark truth. In Hollywood, as in life, the stakes are never just about talent or status. They are about influence, loyalty, and control. Meghan had learned that lesson in the palace, but now she faced it in a realm where tradition offered no protection, and visibility alone was no guarantee of safety. And as she considered her next actions, the magnitude of the situation became clear. The betrayal was not just personal. It was a signal, a warning, and a challenge. Meghan Markle was being tested, not just by Hollywood, but by the very people she once trusted. And what came next would push her to her limits, challenging alliances, loyalty, and her ability to reclaim narrative control. But what Meghan did next would shock everyone, even those who had orchestrated her exclusion, and set the stage for a confrontation no one saw coming. What happens when the media doesn't just report a story, but shapes it, twists it, and amplifies it right in front of you? For Meghan Markle, the Variety Power of Women 2025 gala was already a night of humiliation and betrayal, but it escalated further when a seemingly innocuous editorial hit the presses. The piece, authored by one of Variety's most influential columnists, wasn't overtly about her denial, but those who knew how to read between the lines immediately recognized its target. Subtle words, carefully chosen phrases, and loaded metaphors painted a picture of entitlement, self-promotion, and audacity. To the casual reader, it was commentary on celebrity culture. To Meghan and her inner circle, it was a digital slap across the face. The timing couldn't have been more dramatic. Within hours of the editorial's publication, social media erupted. Clips of Meghan outside the gala, hesitant, tense, visibly agitated, were juxtaposed with quotes from the column. Users shared screenshots, hashtags went viral, and opinion pieces multiplied. Hashtag Meghan Markle down, hashtag Royal Rebel, hashtag denied by Hollywood. All started trending. Analysts dissected the article, noting its subtle implications, its careful framing, and its targeted undertone. It was less about reporting and more about narrative control. Someone, somewhere, wanted Meghan's denial to resonate beyond the red carpet, to become a cultural story. What made the editorial particularly infuriating for Meghan was the contradiction it presented. The columnist framed the piece as a critique of celebrity culture, but the subtext was unmistakable. Meghan Markle had overstepped, sought attention where it wasn't due, and deserved the snub she received. To someone who had meticulously curated her image, advocated for women, and positioned herself as a figure of empowerment, the editorial felt like a direct personal attack. It was an echo of the palace gossip she had endured, now translated into the unforgiving language of Hollywood critique. But there was more. The editorial didn't just critique her actions. It called into question her relevance, subtly suggesting that a former royal-turned celebrity might no longer be fit for the spotlight. Meghan had spent years balancing the expectations of royalty, media scrutiny, and personal ambition. Yet here, in a single column, the narrative was being rewritten, recast, and weaponized. Every word seemed designed to question not only her judgment, but her very place within the Hollywood ecosystem. Meanwhile, the impact on the public was immediate. Social media exploded with interpretations, memes, and hot takes. Some framed Meghan as a victim of gatekeeping and betrayal. Others agreed with the article's framing, calling her entitled or overexposed. The divide was stark and polarizing. For Meghan, the editorial was more than a story, it was a challenge. She had to navigate not just the personal insult, but the broader public perception that now risked defining her brand. Her team reacted swiftly. Calls were made to Variety's offices, emails were drafted, and clarifications requested. Meghan herself debated a response, public, private, or silent, but every choice carried risk. To respond publicly could amplify the critique, turning a single column into a viral feud. To remain silent might suggest agreement or weakness. Each option, Meghan knew, had to be weighed against optics, timing, and potential backlash. The stakes were higher than a single night. Her Hollywood reentry, her credibility, and her narrative control were all on the line. Adding to the drama, insiders revealed that the editorial might have been influenced by internal pressures. Rumors circulated that some executives wanted to subtly convey that Meghan's presence was undesirable, not because of her character or talent, but because of potential controversy and attention. The column, therefore, was not just a critique, it was a calculated amplification of the gatekeeping already enforced at the door. By embedding the story in a prestigious publication, the exclusion transformed from a private administrative decision into a public narrative, magnifying its effect exponentially. The emotional stakes were profound. Meghan had faced criticism before, from tabloids, paparazzi, and royal insiders. Yet this felt different. It wasn't the intensity of the words, it was the orchestration behind them. She recognized that someone had carefully calibrated the messaging, ensuring that the denial and the critique would converge, creating a perfect storm of public perception. The sense of being strategically cornered, publicly scrutinized, and personally attacked created a pressure cooker environment. The editorial also revealed the fragile loyalties within Hollywood. Meghan had relied on certain allies to advocate for her, to manage perception, and to ensure that her narrative remained intact. Now, seeing the column hit without prior warning, she realized just how precarious those alliances had become. Some had remained silent, others complicit, and a few even contributed to the amplification of the story. Betrayal, she understood, was not always direct. It could be passive, subtle, and just as damaging. Amid the chaos, Meghan's analytical mind kicked in. She began tracing connections, identifying potential sources of influence, and assessing who might have orchestrated the editorial. Every line in the column was scrutinized, every choice of words analyzed. This wasn't just a story. It was a message, and to decode it required understanding Hollywood's intricate network of relationships, power plays, and hidden agendas. Her reaction wasn't immediate confrontation, it was strategy. Meghan weighed public response, media engagement, and private communications. She understood that the narrative had already taken root. Millions had read the editorial. Millions more had seen her denied at the door, and the viral social media clips were reinforcing the story. Correcting it would require more than statements. It would require a counter-narrative, careful alignment of allies, and a plan to reclaim control over her image. And yet, the columnist's words lingered. They had created a spark, one that could ignite into a wildfire. Hollywood thrives on momentum, perception, and buzz. A single editorial, strategically timed and perfectly framed, could shift alliances, influence decision-makers, and reshape careers. Meghan was witnessing this firsthand, an invisible hand guiding public perception, shaping narratives, and exerting influence without overt confrontation. But the editorial did more than just critique, it provoked. Fans, critics, and journalists all began speculating about Meghan's next move. Would she respond publicly, retreat quietly, or orchestrate her own counter?